knows every shadow like a lover's name. Her steps a rhythm, a deadly game. Fingers chase the edge of time. She rewrites the world, one line at a time.
Chapter 6. The Delhi Betrayal. The flight from Frankfurt to Delhi took 9 hours on paper, but neither Ananya nor Volkov appeared on any airline's passenger manifest. No boarding passes, no security selfies, no cabin crew smiles recorded on smartphones. Instead, they moved through the shadow corridors of international intelligence, routes carved over decades by services that understood the value of existing just outside the visible spectrum. The aircraft that carried them was a mid-sized business jet, operated by a charter company whose actual ownership webbed back through shell corporations to a Russian state-linked energy subsidiary. The flight plan, filed with Eurocontrol, described a BRICS economic delegation returning from consultations with European stakeholders. The passenger manifest listed 11 names: trade officials, financial analysts, and one cybersecurity advisor from a Russian think tank. Only 3 of those names corresponded to real people. 2 were aliases, carried by the women now strapped into leather seats, listening to the muted thrum of turbofan engines above the clouds. The risk was calculated. Ananya was flying straight into the heart of her pursuer's domain. Back to the city where RAW's leadership held meetings, where her face had been marked with silent priority codes in internal bulletins. But proximity had its own advantages. Intelligence work was like mathematics. Some problems could only be solved within the constraints of the system they belonged to. From abroad, she could harass Operation Leverage, nibble at its flank. From Delhi, she might be able to cut the spinal cord that connected the operation to its internal collaborator. Sometimes the safest place to hide was in plain sight. And sometimes the only way to stop a virus was to walk into the contaminated lab. The cabin lights were dimmed to a soft, neutral glow. Outside the oval windows, the night was featureless. No stars visible above, no city lights below, just the occasional flicker of lightning off to the side where clouds built up in distant convulsions. Volkov sat across from Ananya at the small table that divided their seats. Her tablet rested on the polished wood, displaying lines of code and network schematics in a night-friendly color scheme. She'd removed her blazer, rolled her sleeves up a notch, and let time etch faint fatigue around her eyes, but her focus remained razor-sharp. "Once we land," she said, "you'll be the one walking on tightropes. My people can move near your embassy, not within your headquarters perimeter. Delhi is your board." "That's what worries you," Ananya said quietly. Volkov's gaze flickered up. "I worry about losing assets that are more useful alive than dead. And you are an asset right now. To me, to your country, and, ironically, to those trying to break it. You occupy a very crowded crosshair." "Story of my life," Ananya said. There was no bravado in it, just a dry acknowledgement of fact. They reviewed their plan again, not because repetition magically increased success probabilities, but because rehearsed patterns freed the mind to handle unexpected deviations. Step 1. Establish a base in Delhi, outside RAW's official infrastructure, not a local civilian safe house, too exposed, too easily penetrated, but a node under foreign protection, yet loosely enough tied that plausible deniability could be maintained. Step 2. Analyze the Frankfurt capture in a secure environment, map the latest leverage deployment paths, and correlate them with internal Indian infrastructure timelines. Identify where the internal mole's guidance had shaped external decisions. Step 3. Force contact. The internal betrayal could not be confirmed from console logs and circumstantial correlations alone. A direct conversation was required, with someone high enough in RAW's Cyber Countermeasures Division to have both access and motive, someone like Rajesh Malhotra. The jet touched down at Indira Gandhi International Airport shortly after dawn. Officially, it was just another government-aligned flight arriving from Europe. Such aircraft passed through a different set of gates than tourist-laden airliners. Customs formalities were handled in quiet rooms where handshakes mattered more than scanners. Ananya stayed inside the aircraft until the small welcoming party finished their brief protocol exchanges. Her role on the manifest, an assistant analyst from a trade ministry subdepartment, did not warrant ceremonial acknowledgement. That was precisely the point. When she finally descended the steps, Delhi greeted her with its usual assault. The humidity hit first, a thick, invisible wall that wrapped around her like a damp blanket. Even in the relatively controlled environment of the diplomatic apron, the air felt heavier than in Frankfurt, laden with particulates and latent heat. Beyond the airport perimeter, Delhi's traffic murmured like a distant storm. Later, when they moved deeper into the city, that murmur would become a symphony of honking horns, revving engines, and shouted instructions. The smells, jet fuel here, but soon to be replaced by dust, frying oil, exhaust, and the sharp tang of spices, awaited like familiar ghosts. Ananya had been born here, in a government housing block in South Delhi, raised on its contradictions. Her childhood had been filled with images of Republic Day parades on television, even as load shedding intermittently plunged her neighborhood into darkness. She had learned early that Delhi could be both the seat of power and the embodiment of systemic neglect. Often on the same street, she joined Rao in these environs, passing through training compounds hidden behind innocuous walls, learning to see the city not as a chaotic sprawl, but as a layered operational environment. Every flyover, every market, every nondescript building could be a vector of risk, of asset access, of escape. Right now, that familiarity was no longer just comfort. It was weapon. The car that met them bore diplomatic plates, Russian tricolor insignia, discreet on the grille. The driver wore a neutral gray suit, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses despite the early hour. He opened the rear door without comment. Volkov slid in first, then Ananya, keeping her head slightly bowed as they passed within the field of a CCTV camera. Facial capture at Gate 3, Volkov said softly. But as far as the system knows, it just logged Elena Kovac, trade advisor. The alias should hold. Should, Ananya repeated, watching the airport recede. We're stacking a lot of shoulds today. Delhi unfolded along the highway as they drove in, the industrial outskirts giving way to more formal roadways lined with government buildings, corporate towers, and the occasional cluster of unauthorized constructions that clung to available space like stubborn moss. They did not go toward Lodi Road. That access led to Raw headquarters, where any anomaly in traffic sensors or perimeter patterns would draw attention. Instead, they turned into the diplomatic enclave of Chanakyapuri, a neighborhood of broad avenues, manicured hedges, and embassy compounds guarded by layered security. Their destination was a modest apartment block set back from the main road, its facade indistinguishable from dozens of other buildings that housed mid-level officials and foreign staff. The unit they entered had no direct signage. On paper, it was rented to a Russian trade attaché who traveled frequently and rarely entertained. In practice, it was a liaison node. Inside, the safe house had been optimized for function over comfort. A small living area held neutral-colored furniture, a television that worked but had never been used for actual entertainment, and a wall shelf lined with nondescript books that made up a plausible but boring library. The kitchen was stocked with basics: coffee, tea, a few boxes of instant meals. The second bedroom had been converted into an operations center. 2 desks, 3 high-end workstations, a rack of encrypted communications gear, and an array of hardware that looked like a cross between a server closet and a hacker's dream. The location was chosen with surgical precision, 3 blocks from the Russian embassy, close enough that any abrupt security shift could be plausibly framed as embassy-related, far enough that Indian surveillance would not automatically flag every visitor as a high-priority foreign agent. The safe house lived in a gray band of assumed activity. "This will be our base," Volkov said, shutting the door and engaging 3 separate locks. "My team can move freely between here and the embassy under cover of routine logistics. Your movements," she looked at Ananya, "your movements will require more creativity." "I've had practice," Ananya said. She dropped her satchel onto one of the desks and pulled out the exploit device that had sucked secrets from Meridian servers in Frankfurt. Its matte surface reflected nothing, but inside, it now contained a roadmap of compromised supply chains. For the next 12 hours, she immersed herself in analysis. She connected Volkov's key module to a secure terminal, decrypted the memory images using the Russian tools, and began cross-referencing server manifests with known infrastructure endpoints. Static IP lists bloomed into dynamic graphs, port calls cross-checked with customs logs, firmware update timestamps aligned with coincident random failures. At far-flung facilities, sectors lit up on the screen. Petroleum imports from Russia, mapped through Western ports and special economic zones. Defense procurement channels, where spare parts for Su-30 fighters and S-400 batteries were routed. Pharmaceutical raw material pipelines, particularly those linked to cancer drugs and high-end antibiotics. Telecommunications equipment that formed the backbones of both civilian and secure government networks. Operation Leverage had not just identified key nodes where Indian and Russian interests intersected. It had constructed an intricate choreography around them. A delayed shipment misaligned with a crucial parliamentary vote. A compliance glitch, timed with a high-profile visit from a Russian delegation. A custom seizure of a minor technology component, framed as suspicious, triggering concerns. In Western media about India importing dual-use Russian hardware, each incident by itself was manageable. Aggregated, they formed a narrative arc. India's economic reliance on Russia was undermining its global credibility and internal stability. But the manifests Volkov had helped her steal revealed something worse than technical sabotage. Her cursor hovered over a subgraph labeled INT feed. It represented a series of data ingestion points, secure channels feeding real-time intelligence into Leverage's targeting engine. The metadata attached to those channels made her stomach tighten. Someone had been providing external adversaries with precise, timely updates on RAW's internal threat response doctrines, patch deployment schedules, and incident investigation patterns. Not just access credentials, operational methodology. The mole wasn't a passive leak. They were a co-author. She zoomed in on the INT feed cluster, timestamps lined up with key events in Mumbai and elsewhere. The exact moment Ananya had launched her quarantine protocol at Ananta Exports, the delay between her discovering the anomaly and the arrest team's arrival, the sequence of RAW's internal system lockdowns. Each internal incident had been mirrored externally within minutes, sometimes seconds. External actors had updated their operations in near real time, staying one step ahead, pivoting when necessary. Someone with intimate knowledge of RAW's protocols and Ananya's working habits had been feeding them everything. A familiar weight of betrayed trust settled in her chest. She was not surprised. Experience had vaccinated her against shock in this domain. But there was a deeper ache beneath the professional assessment. India's most critical cyber defense division had not merely been infiltrated. It had been actively weaponized against itself. Volkov appeared in the doorway of the converted operations room, 2 paper cups of chai in hand. The drinks had been procured from a street vendor whose stall existed invisibly amid the diplomatic enclave's sanitized landscaping. The vendor had no idea that some of the world's more complex geopolitical maneuvers were being fueled by his masala mix. "Your face suggests unpleasant discoveries," Volkov said, passing 1 cup to Ananya. Ananya accepted it, the heat grounding her fingers. "The internal compromise goes deeper than access credentials," she said. "Someone has been feeding them our threat response methodologies, our classified vulnerability audits, even our personnel deployment rotation patterns." She took a sip, letting the spicy sweetness cut through the chemical aftertaste of extended focus. "They knew I'd be at Ananta Exports," she continued, "not just because of my posting, but because they anticipated my response to the anomaly. They were ready to frame me the moment I deviated from the approved script." "Any suspects?" Volkov asked, leaning against the doorframe, tablet still in her other hand. Ananya tapped a key. A dossier filled the secondary monitor. Rajesh Malhotra, Senior Analyst, Cyber Countermeasures Division, Research and Response. The photograph showed a man in his early 50s, hair receding slightly at the temples, face lined by late nights and too many crisis briefings. His eyes, captured mid-blink in the image, carried a familiar blend of fatigue and intensity. Malhotra joined RAW in 1999, Ananya said, signals intelligence background. He cut his teeth during the Kargil conflict, intercepting Pakistani field communications. Since then, he's rotated through 3 different units, always in technical roles, never in policy. By all accounts, his record is exemplary. Until it wasn't, Volkov said. 3 years ago, Ananya continued, his son, Rohan, was working as a software engineer in Silicon Valley. H-1B visa, good salary. It was the classic middle-class success story you see in Delhi drawing rooms. She pulled up another document, a U.S. court filing, redacted, referencing a visa irregularity investigation. Then his son's visa renewal got caught in a crackdown wave, she said. Officially, it was random compliance enforcement. Unofficially. Volkov took a sip of her chai. Unofficially, those crackdowns often act as recruitment vectors, she said. We know. Some of ours have been approached the same way. The son's renewal was denied, Ananya said. He had to return to India, leaving behind a decade of relationships and professional trajectory. At the same time, Malhotra became noticeably more cautious, more conservative in his internal opinions, less willing to challenge Western-authored best practices, more inclined to argue for strategic prudence in avoiding confrontation. Resentment layered over fear, Volkov said. Classic leverage point, personal grievance intersecting with access. I don't want to hang a man based on his son's misfortune, Ananya said, but the timing lines up too neatly with the first test deployments of leverage's framework in our observation logs. 18 months ago, the volume and precision of external anticipatory behavior increased in ways that match someone with his level of clearance feeding them. You'll need confirmation, Volkov said. Speculation is useful for direction, not for action. I know, Ananya replied, which means direct contact. That made Volkov straighten. Direct contact? She repeated. You're a wanted fugitive, Ananya. Rao has quietly marked you as a compromised asset. Walking into their city and seeking out a senior analyst is not contact. It is volunteering for entrapment. They're searching for me at borders, airports, allied safe houses, and anywhere a rational fugitive would go, Ananya said. They're querying financial records, scanning train CCTV, flagging international phone calls. They are not expecting me to sit at a tea stall 300 meters from Lodi Road. You sound almost amused, Volkov said. I'm not. Ananya's gaze was flint. But I know Delhi. I know Ra's blind angles because I helped design some of them. Malhotra and I used to meet in certain places when we were working on cross-division collaborations. Old routines are hard to abandon, especially for someone his age. If I use the right phrase, he'll come. If he's dirty, he'll also bring his shadows. Either way, we learn something. Volkov was silent for several seconds, weighing something invisible between them. You know what you're doing, she said finally. It wasn't approval. It was acknowledgement. I know what's necessary, Ananya replied. The tea house, Mir Chanakya Puri's diplomatic enclave, had existed for almost 40 years. It squatted in the shadow of a larger, newer building. Its exterior a patchwork of faded paint, hand-lettered signs, and creeping ivy that no one had bothered to tame. The door's bell had long since stopped working. Now, patrons announced themselves with the subtle scrape of wood on stone as they stepped inside. Inside, the air smelled of cardamom, milk, and history. The owner, Gurpreet Singh, had inherited the establishment from his father, who had opened it in the post-emergency era when Delhi's bureaucrats needed somewhere cheap and honest to drink chai away from prying ears. Over the decades, the clientele had evolved, but never fundamentally changed. Government clerks, junior officers, mid-level analysts, occasionally a foreign face or two whose quiet demeanor suggested they were not tourists. Ananya had first been brought here as a trainee by a senior officer who thought she needed to understand the real canteen network, not just the sanitized cafeterias inside official compounds. She had watched field operatives and analysts exchange information over cheap steel tumblers and greasy samosas. The clink of stainless steel punctuating sentences that would never appear in file notes. Now she sat in the corner booth, back to the wall, facing both the entrance and the narrow corridor that led to the kitchen, a habit born from training and sharpened by recent experience. She wore a simple pale blue salwar kameez and a gray dupatta draped loosely around her neck, glasses with slightly thick frames perched on her nose. The lenses ground with enough distortion to alter the way automated facial recognition would outline her features. Her hair was tied back in a plain braid, with no visible jewelry. She looked like any number of middle-class Delhi women who worked in offices nearby and had stepped out for real chai instead of machine-made sludge. 3 hours earlier, she had sent a message along an encrypted channel that she knew Malhotra still monitored, a relic of an old testing framework that had never been fully decommissioned, repurposed by her into a covert passage. The message had been short. "I know about leverage. We need to talk." The usual place. The usual place in the old days had been a coffee shop on Janpath that had since closed, gentrified into a boutique clothing store. Anyone receiving that phrase and understanding its context would know the instruction embedded in it. Find a place with similar qualities: familiar, neutral, old. A place that had survived while other venues changed. Places like this tea house. Gurpreet's staff moved efficiently through the narrow aisles, balancing metal trays loaded with small glasses and plates of pakoras. Ceiling fans stirred the warm air. A radio in the corner played classic Hindi songs at low volume. The lyrics about lost love and fate threading between conversations about petrol prices and office politics. Ananya checked the time on her phone. Not the secure one, but a cheap feature handset bought under a false name. Malhotra was punctual by nature and by conditioning. If he arrived at all, he would be on time. He arrived on the exact minute. He entered with the bearing of someone who had spent his life trying to be inconspicuous and mostly succeeding. Plain shirt, plain trousers, a weathered leather bag slung over his shoulder. His hair had thinned more since she'd last seen him in person. He'd lost a little weight. His eyes were the same, dark, tired, wired. He paused just inside the doorway, letting his vision adjust. Gurpreet glanced up, recognized him, and gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement, reserved for long-time customers whose faces had blended into the background of his life. Malhotra ordered chai without looking at the menu. His gaze swept the room, seemingly casual. When he saw Ananya sitting in the corner booth, his entire body stilled for half a heartbeat. Recognition landed first. Memory moved behind his eyes as he registered the subtle differences: her clothes, the glasses, the tension in her shoulders, and then overrode them with the deeper pattern of identity. Then came a flicker of something else, fear, certainly, but also something like relief or resignation, as if part of him had been waiting for this contact and dreading it equally. He picked up his steel tumbler from the counter when it arrived and crossed the room, the careful movements of a man walking across ice. "Ananya," he said quietly as he slid into the booth opposite her. "Rajesh," she replied. "You shouldn't be here," he said. It wasn't a greeting, it was a verdict. "Neither should you," she said. "Not while you're feeding operational intelligence to a hostile foreign operation." He flinched as if she'd struck him. He didn't deny it. That, more than anything, confirmed her hypothesis. Spies lied reflexively when caught unprepared. Confession without prompt usually came from those who had already decided on some level that their choices were indefensible. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Chai steamed between them, the faint clink of glasses and murmured conversations forming a background texture that felt almost indecently normal. "My son," Malhotra said, finally. His voice cracked on the second word. He cleared his throat and tried again. "My son, Rohan, was approached in San Francisco." It started with immigration officers, audits, questions about his original application. They claimed he had misrepresented certain employment dates. It was nonsense, but the paperwork looked very official. He looked down at his hands, fingers curled around the glass, knuckles white. "They threatened criminal charges," he continued. "Fraud, deportation, a permanent ban from entering the United States." They told him that such a charge would complicate any future attempts to get work abroad, even in other countries. They sent him documents with seals and signatures. He forwarded everything to me. I checked. Some of those officials were real. Some were not. "And then," Ananya said softly, "someone contacted you, offering help." "Yes," he nodded once. "A man claiming to represent a legal counseling service that specialized in resolving complex visa matters. He said they had relationships with various agencies, that they could smooth things over if I agreed to provide some consulting." "What did they ask for?" Ananya asked, though she could guess. "At first, nothing sensitive," Malhotra said, defensively, as if eager to justify the early steps. "Broad assessments of regional cyber threats, General overviews of India's public posture in certain areas, things you could piece together from think tank reports if you knew where to look. I told myself I was just providing context, nothing actionable. Ananya's silence made the rationalization collapse under its own weight. But then it escalated, he admitted. They wanted specifics, internal procedures, how RAW triaged cyber incidents, who signed off on emergency patches, the structure of our audit logs. I refused at first. They reminded me what was at stake. My son, he repeated, voice rough. They sent me photos of him leaving his office, of him at a grocery store. They had eyes on him. They said that if I cooperated, the charges would quietly disappear. If I refused, Rohan would become an example, Ananya finished. Her tone was flat, but not unkind. Yes, he swallowed. So I rationalized. I told myself I could give them limited access, feed them outdated patterns, keep their impact shallow. I thought I could play both sides, maintain my loyalty while surviving their pressure. How long? She asked. 18 months, he said. Maybe 19. Time blurs when you're constantly compartmentalizing your thoughts. 18 months. It matched Volkov's assessment of when Leverage's external behavior had become markedly more anticipatory. At what point did they ask about me? Ananya asked. He looked at her over the rim of his glass. 2 months ago, he said. They wanted a detailed profile, your operational history, your decision-making patterns in crisis scenarios, your reputation within RAW. They already knew too much. I wondered whether someone else had been feeding them partials. Probably, Ananya said. Operations like this rarely rely on a single source. When you were embedded at Ananta Exports, Malhotra continued, they told me to monitor your activities and flag any deviation from standard risk assessor protocols. The day you triggered that quarantine, I was instructed to inject false entries into the audit logs, to make it appear that your credentials had accessed certain restricted databases without authorization, right before the intrusion. He took a breath that sounded like something breaking inside. I knew what they were doing, he said. They wanted to discredit you, neutralize you. They said it was necessary, that your tendency to dig deeper than your orders could expose the broader operation before they were ready to act. How many other operations have you compromised? Ananya asked. The question was almost gentle. Yours was the first that involved active sabotage, he said quickly, as if that somehow mitigated the betrayal. The rest was passive intelligence. They asked where certain defensive blinkers were weakest. I pointed them at places where we had redundancies. I tried to steer them away from things that would truly cripple us. I told myself I was minimizing harm. But harm still happened, Ananya said, whether you minimized it or not. His shoulders sagged. Yes, he whispered, and now it's beyond anything I can influence. He reached into his bag with trembling fingers and pulled out a small data chip in a clear plastic sleeve. He placed it on the table between them, the tiny object suddenly feeling very heavy in the space. There's something else, he said. They're not just targeting economic infrastructure. She waited. There's a false flag component, he continued. They're building fabricated evidence, chains designed to make it appear that Russian intelligence orchestrated the entire operation. Certain code segments are being annotated with markers that mimic Russian toolsets. They're planting communication artifacts, linking leverage nodes to Russian-affiliated servers, even though those servers are under their own control. Ananya's mind raced ahead. They want to poison India-Russia cooperation, not just through economic damage, but through trust collapse. She said, force Delhi to see Moscow as the architect of its pain. Isolate you from your only real counterbalance to Western cyber dominance. Yes, he said, if they succeed, any future cooperation between RAW and SVR will be politically radioactive, even if both sides want it. Volkov had suspected as much. Malhotra's confirmation gave it flesh. What's on the chip? Ananya asked, tapping it lightly with one finger. Partial maps of their command infrastructure, he said. Logs of the channels I've used to communicate with them, snippets of their internal tasking orders. I copied what I could without triggering their intrusion detection counterchecks. The Apex server, the one they refer to as the orchestrator, is physically located in Northern Virginia, a tech campus outside Reston, registered as a cloud services provider. The chip has the building coordinates and the internal network's gateway credentials. I had to reconstruct some of it from noisy data, but it's enough to start. Outside, through the narrow tea house window, the soundscape shifted. The background hum of traffic gained a sharper note. Ananya heard the distinct pitch of engines, slowing not for a red light, but for deliberate positioning. Motor vibrations changed from random to synchronized. Her tactical awareness flared. She turned her head slightly, keeping her eyes half-lidded to avoid drawing attention. Across the street, two black SUVs with darkened windows had come to a near-synchronous stop. Their placement was too neat, their timing too precise. Men in plain clothes stepped out. No uniforms, but their body language screamed professional coordination. "You were followed," she said quietly. Malhotra's face blanched. "I took precautions," he protested in a whisper. "I changed routes, used crowded areas." "You've been under observation for months," Ananya said. "If they noticed a behavioral shift, if they suspected you might break pattern, they'd widen their net. You coming here would look like a deviation." She was already moving. She plucked the chip off the table and slipped it into an inner pocket with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of handling sensitive media. Then she grabbed Malhotra's forearm, not roughly, but with enough pressure to jolt him out of his paralysis. "Kitchen," she said. "Now." They slid out of the booth. Gurpreet looked up, saw something in Ananya's face, and did not ask questions. He'd been in business long enough to recognize certain tides. He jerked his chin toward the back. "Go," he said simply. The kitchen was a compressed storm. Boiling pots, sizzling pans, the sharp aromas of ginger, green chili, and frying batter. Steam clouded the small space. Two younger staff members jumped as Ananya and Malhotra shouldered through. But Gurpreet's shout, a single word in Punjabi, kept them from reacting further. The rear exit was a narrow metal door, half hidden behind sacks of flour. Ananya shoved it open. The alley beyond was textbook. Narrow, lined with service doors, air conditioner exhausts, and stray garbage cans. On one end, it opened onto a busier street. On the other, it tapered toward a side lane, where one of the black SUVs had repositioned itself, partially blocking the exit. Three men in plain clothes stood near that end, weapons not yet drawn, but hands hovering near concealed holsters. They were aiming for a quiet extraction, not a shootout. That gave her margins to work with. Ananya's fingers found the small device clicked inside her sleeve, a compact emergency signal beacon tied into Volkov's operational net. She pressed it once, activating a pre-arranged distress code. Somewhere 3 blocks away, a secure handset would be vibrating in a Russian safe house, and contingency plans would be sliding into motion. "Run," she said to Malhotra, pointing toward the alley's open end that led into the busier street. "Head toward the Russian embassy compound. Don't stop, don't look back. Don't engage with anyone unless they identify themselves with the code phrase we discussed that night in Hyderabad." He stared at her. Fear had carved deep grooves into his face. "Ananya, Run," she repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. He ran. His gait was less steady than it had been years ago, but adrenaline added a half-step of speed. He pushed past a vendor arranging crates near the alley mouth and vanished into the denser crowd beyond. The men at the blocked end had a decision to make: chase the older, less physically imposing man with an unknown package, or secure the anomaly now walking toward them with a confidence that suggested more trouble. Ananya turned toward them, her mind already sketching the next 60 seconds. She needed chaos. Controlled chaos if possible, but any disruption that marred their operational script would help. On the wall beside her, painted a faded red and partially obscured by posters, was a mechanical fire alarm lever. One of those stubborn old devices that didn't rely on digital networks or remote commands. Just a simple circuit that, when triggered, screamed at an entire block to be alert. She reached over and pulled it. For a half-beat, nothing happened. Then sirens erupted, not just in the tea house, but in neighboring shops and offices that shared the same antiquated alarm system. A shrill, insistent wail echoed through the alley and spilled into the streets, joined by the rapid blare of emergency bells. Within seconds, doors along the alley flew open. Restaurant staff poured out, some shouting, some looking confused. A small office disgorged a cluster of workers, clutching bags and phones. People instinctively sought exits, filling the space with bodies and motion. The pursuing team's clean lines shattered under the human wave. They tried to maintain visual on Ananya, but every time they fixed on her, someone stepped into their path. A man carrying a stack of newspapers, a woman shepherding 2 children, a delivery boy balancing a crate of soft drinks. Ananya let the chaos swallow her for a moment, then veered toward a side passage between 2 buildings, so narrow that even 2 people passing had to turn sideways. She half slipped, half squeezed through, her shoulder scraping rough plaster, the alarms muffled behind her. On the far end of the passage, a black sedan with diplomatic plates waited with its engine idling. The driver's side window was down just enough for her to see Volkov's profile. Inside, Volkov ordered. Ananya dove into the rear seat. The door slammed shut behind her with a solid, reassuring thump. The driver, a Russian security officer whose name she didn't know and didn't need to know, threw the car into gear and accelerated smoothly, merging into the traffic of the broader road. Through the rear window, Ananya glimpsed the alley mouth receding. 2 of the plainclothes pursuers emerged, scanning the area, then splitting their focus between the crowd and the street. They were too late. The sedan was already gone, just one more vehicle in a city full of vehicles. Malhotra? Volkov asked, eyes still on the road ahead. Heading for your embassy perimeter, Ananya said, catching her breath. He'll be trying to reach Sanctuary. Your people will need to intercept him before Raw's internal security does. He's compromised, but he still has value, if not as a double, then as a debrief source. We're on it, Volkov said. I triggered a sweep as soon as your signal came through. Our perimeter cameras picked him up 30 seconds ago. If he makes it to the outer gate, they'll have to decide whether to risk a diplomatic incident by trying to grab him under our cameras. They won't, Ananya said. Not in Chanakipuri. Too many eyes, too many potential leaks. Let us hope your leadership still fears public embarrassment more than it desires clean resolutions, Volkov said. The car turned onto a broader avenue lined with trees and embassy walls. Indian security personnel stood at some corners, paramilitary uniforms looking both reassuring and menacing. The sedan's plates bought it a certain level of indifference. Diplomatic vehicles were part of the enclave's landscape. What did he give you? Volkov asked after a few seconds of silence. Ananya reached into her inner pocket and held up the small data chip between thumb and forefinger. The location of their command hub, she said. Northern Virginia, tech campus outside Reston, masquerading as cloud infrastructure. Access gateway credentials pieced together from their tasking traffic. Enough to get close, not enough to walk waltzing through the front door. Volkov's expression hardened, not with anger, but with the focused anticipation of a chess player seeing a new part of the board. Then that's where this phase ends, she said. The architect who built leverage believes distance protects him. We will have to disabuse him of that notion. She took the chip gently from Ananya's hand and slipped it into a small, shielded case. And your agency? She asked. Now that we've forced your mole to reveal a bit of his hand, what do you intend to do? Ananya looked out the window. Lodi Road was not directly visible from here, but she could feel its gravitational pull. The compound where she had once walked in and out every day, believing herself part of a flawed but fundamentally aligned machine. I intend, she said, to make it impossible for them to ignore what he's done. To leave them with a choice between cleaning their own house or being exposed as collaborators by forces they cannot control. Volkov nodded once. Ambitious, she said. Necessary, Ananya replied. Delhi scrolled past the windshield. Flyovers, parks, markets, security checkpoints. All the familiar elements of a capital city that had taught her loyalty and suspicion in equal measure. She felt no nostalgia, no regret about what she was about to do. Only the cold clarity of purpose that had carried her from a data vault in Mumbai to a cargo bay in Frankfurt, to this car in Delhi. The next move lay far from here, in a different hemisphere, under a different set of watchful eyes. But the betrayal that had made it necessary had been born in this city, nurtured in its corridors of power, and given teeth by men who believed they could play all sides without paying a price. She intended to prove them wrong.
Her eyes burn cold, her touch ignites. is the heartbeat in the dead of night.